Hey there, friend. Tonight, we're slipping back in time to a world of candles, stone walls, and medical advice you probably shouldn't follow. Let's talk about something truly unsettling and oddly comforting. What did it mean to feel off in the Middle Ages? Were you anxious? Moody? Crying over soup? Back then, that wasn't just a bad day. That was an imbalance. Of what, you ask? Well, body soup. That's right. Your every feeling, from laughter to despair, was believed to be stirred up by a broth of inner liquids. They called them humors, not because they were funny, but because they controlled your fate in ways no one really understood. The idea came from ancient Greece. A man named Hippocrates, and later Galen, decided your body was ruled by 4 sacred substances: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Each one did something different. Too much blood? You'd be energetic, cheerful, a bit too jolly. Until, of course, someone stuck a leech on you to calm your joy down. Too much yellow bile? Ah, yes. You were irritable, impulsive, maybe great in battle, but unbearable at dinner. Black bile meant sadness. The slow kind. The kind where you stare out windows for no reason, sigh deeply, and forget why you walked into a room. Phlegm, our quietest friend, was blamed for sluggishness. Moving slow, thinking slower, and napping through entire arguments. Was that depression? No. You were just full of cool, damp goo. So if you wept, the doctor didn't offer a kind word. He offered a knife. Or a bucket. Maybe both. Because obviously, if the mind hurts, the answer is to open a vein. That was called bloodletting. And yes, it was every bit as cozy as it sounds. Still not cured? Try a laxative. Or a bath in herbs. Or better yet, ask yourself the most medieval medical question of all. Do I feel more damp or dry today? No, really, that was a thing. A doctor, and we're being generous with that term, might smell your breath, check your urine against a chart that looked like a rainbow of terror, and decide your soul was too moist. In which case, you were likely too wet in spirit. And that meant purging, draining, or if you were lucky, being prayed at. See, the 4 humors weren't just physical. They were moral. Too much of one, and your very personality was under suspicion. And if the treatments failed? Well, then it wasn't the humors. It was God. Or sin. Or possibly the moon. But we'll save that story for later. For now, just picture this. You feel sad. Not eat an apple sad. Not spilled my beer sad. But true, aching, can't smile sad. You go for help, and the man in charge pulls out a chart of fluids, holds up a leech, and says, "Let's drain the grief out of you, shall we?" Comforting, isn't it? But oddly enough, people believed it. For centuries. This was not some strange village idea. It was the idea. The church agreed. The physicians agreed. Even the guy who sold onions agreed. Everyone believed you were a walking stew pot, and the only way to feel better was to fix the recipe. Too sweet? Add bile. Too bitter? Remove blood. Too strange? Pray harder. And if none of it helped? Maybe you were just too broken to fix. But hey, no one said medieval wellness was easy. Just loud, wet, and slightly terrifying. So if you're lying in bed tonight feeling a little off, remember, at least no one's standing over you with a knife and a very confident look saying, "You'll feel better once we bleed the melancholy out." Welcome back, dear listener. You've made it past the leeches and the damp spirit charts. Well done. Now let's open the chapel door. Because if you lived in medieval Europe and your mind was drifting, the person you'd turn to wasn't a doctor. It was a priest. Why? Because the soul and the mind were seen as roommates. And when one started misbehaving, you called the clergy. Did you feel anxious? Restless? Like the walls were a bit too loud? That wasn't stress. That was probably sin. A forgotten one. A hidden one. Or one you hadn't even committed yet. But might. Maybe your sadness meant the devil had taken a liking to your interior decor. Maybe your nerves were holy warning signs. Either way, confession was your first appointment. And by therapy, we mean a stern voice telling you to fast, repent, and stop being proud of that new blanket you were secretly admiring. Yes, even comfort could be suspect. If you felt joy, too much of it, that was vanity. If you felt too little, sloth of the soul. There was a word for that. Acedia. It meant spiritual sadness. Not in the poetic sense. In the you're not trying hard enough sense. And so, if you showed signs of what we now call mental illness, your diagnosis was not chemical imbalance. It was moral imbalance. Were you skipping church? Laughing too much? Coveting your neighbor's cheese wheel? If yes, you needed repentance, not herbs. But for the tougher cases, hallucinations, shouting at trees, or being too quiet at dinner, the church had other tools. They might assign you a pilgrimage, a nice long walk. Several hundred miles should clear the mind. Or prayer vigils, staying up all night with monks chanting around you like spiritual Wi-Fi. And if things got really strange, a minor exorcism, just to be safe. Because in medieval logic, if it's not the bile, it's the demon. And demons were everywhere. Even regular feelings came under suspicion. If you laughed too loudly, pride. If you cried for too long, spiritual weakness. Feeling deeply was dangerous. In fact, the deeper you felt, the more it looked like you'd invited darkness in with tea and a hymn. So what did treatment look like? Well, picture this. You're led into a quiet stone chapel. You're told to kneel, and then someone reads psalms at you until you stop looking so sad. Or you're sent to fast. For days. On purpose. Because apparently hunger scares demons. Some were even given a spiritual time out in silence. Monks and nuns might guide you through quietude, guilt, and sleeping on the floor until either you feel better or you stop having feelings entirely. Sometimes you were locked in a room, gently, of course, with love, and a very firm wooden door. They'd tell you it was for your soul, that solitude would purify you, that your tears were a step toward holiness. And if not, well, they had other options. They had. You could sleep near relics, a saint's toe, perhaps, or a drop of martyr's blood. You'd lie beside it and hope the holiness rubbed off. Because you see, pain was sacred. Suffering had meaning. At least, that's what they said, as they handed you your third candle and another verse to memorize. It wasn't always cruel. Some monks truly wanted to help. They believed routine, prayer, and silence could restore peace. And sometimes they did. Structure has power. Chants have rhythm. Even guilt has comfort when explained with a gentle voice and a clear sky. But it's important to know, compassion was not the goal. Purification was. If you cried, they didn't ask why. They asked, when did you stop praying? In a world without psychiatry, you needed the stars, some herbs, and a priest with good Latin and low tolerance for moods. So if you ever feel sad today, and someone offers you a cup of tea, smile. You live in this golden age. No one's sending you on a 300-mile hike with no shoes, a wooden cross, and a deeply concerned monk trailing behind singing psalms at the moon. Good evening again, dear listener. You've made it through the priests, the prayers, and the leeches. Now let's talk about something just a bit quieter. A room. Stone walls. A door that only opens from the outside. Yes, tonight we're talking about medieval mental health isolation, also known as you seem troubled, so please stay in this room for the next few years. Let's say you weren't screaming in Latin. Not yet. But you were definitely odd at breakfast. Maybe you stared at firewood a little too long, or you wept during lunch for no clear reason. You forgot your own name once, and yesterday you complimented the wind. No one wanted to hurt you, but they also didn't want you talking to the carrots again. So you were gently placed into a space of reflection, which is a very polite way of saying you were locked in a room. Sometimes this was a monastic cell, a tiny nook tucked inside a sprawling stone abbey. No chains, no screaming. Just you, a straw mat, and maybe a bucket. If you were lucky, a narrow window let in some light. And twice a day, Someone would pass through a bowl of something technically classified as food. Not warm, not delicious, but consistent. Monks might offer prayers on your behalf. Not with you, on behalf. From the hallway, at a safe distance. And if one was feeling especially kind, he might drop off a sprig of herbs or whisper a psalm through the door with a tone that suggested he still liked you. A little. This was known in some circles as the gentle approach. It didn't involve shouting, or knives, or tying you to anything, which by medieval standards was practically spa treatment. The thinking went like this. Your soul was out of balance. Your mind? Unquiet. And the solution? Quiet. Silence. Solitude. A timeout for grown-ups, with bonus guilt. Now, not every locked room was part of a monastery. Some were part of early institutions. We hesitate to call them hospitals because they didn't offer medicine, or comfort, or much hope, really. But they did offer shelter. In cities like Cairo or Valencia, and later in London and Paris, small buildings existed where the mentally unwell could be contained. Not healed, just kept somewhere. These rooms were simple, bare, cold. A place to not be seen, to not disturb the rhythm of a very superstitious society. To their credit, some communities meant well. They believed the mentally ill were closer to God, touched by the divine. Somewhere between prophet and poet. But practically, that belief didn't change much, because letting you roam free was still inconvenient. So they kept you in the back room, lit a candle, and hoped for improvement by Easter. Families often begged monasteries to take in a relative who was, shall we say, prone to unusual behavior. They'd promise donations, extra bread, whatever it took to make the problem disappear behind someone else's door. Because in a village, everyone watched. And no one wanted to be the house where Uncle Thaddeus kept arguing with his boots. Inside those locked rooms, time passed slowly. You were meant to pray, to reflect, to fast, and maybe cry productively. The room didn't punish you. It waited for your mind to return on its own. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't, and sometimes people just faded there. But not all locked rooms were cruel. Some monks offered real human presence. They'd sit near your door and sing quietly, or read the Psalms aloud in a steady, calming rhythm, sometimes just being there without judgment. They couldn't offer therapy or understanding, but they could offer a routine, a structure, and in that structure, some found peace. Others just found a slightly more poetic version of being alone. Still, it's worth noting, this was often the kindest treatment available. No beatings, no exorcisms, just a quiet space, and a hope that your sadness would tire itself out. In time, asylums would evolve, but in the early days, this was it. A room, a bowl, a prayer, and silence. Lots and lots of silence. Welcome back, Midnight Wanderer. You've survived the cell, the prayers, the very suspicious soup. But we're not done yet, because medieval mental health care had one more category, the creative approach. This was when things got experimental. Solutions that sound less like medicine and more like what happens when your physician has a dream and then follows it with full confidence. Let's begin with a classic, the dead owl treatment. Yes, if your thoughts were too heavy or your sadness refused to leave, someone might suggest you tie a dead owl to your head, because owls are wise, you see, and wisdom, in theory, absorbs confusion. So the logic went, the owl would soak up your sadness like a feathered sponge, directly through your scalp. In practice, you mostly ended up with lice and questions. But it gets better. Feeling anxious? There's always powdered emeralds. Just grind up a gemstone, yes, a real one, and either rub it on your chest or eat a very small pinch. It won't help, but it will ruin your jewelry collection and your digestive lining at the same time. Still feeling off? How about astrology? Because if Mars was sulking, your soul might suffer. And the cure? Wait until Jupiter feels friendlier. That was it. You just had to time your recovery with the planets, like a mood horoscope with consequences. Some physicians, and again, we use that word loosely, believed that madness could be frightened away. So they wrapped the patient in wolfskin during a thunderstorm. Yes, wrapped in fur, in a storm, to scare the sadness out. Imagine being cold, wet, and confused, only to be told you're halfway cured. Still no relief? Let's try this one. Whisper into a black dog's ear. Something sad, something heavy. Then release the dog. Let it run far away. And with it, your sorrow. Like a furry therapy courier headed straight for the hills. You could also be treated with pigeon smoke, which is exactly what it sounds like. They'd stuff herbs into a bird, not gently, light it, and waft the smoke near your head. The results were unclear, but the pigeon was never pleased. If none of that worked, there was always pilgrimage, the all-purpose medieval prescription. Feeling depressed? Walk 300 miles to a church you've never seen. Maybe talk to a relic. Sleep on straw. Blister your soul clean. This, they believed, was healing, or at least distracting, which, let's be honest, is sometimes close enough. Now, to be fair, not all of these treatments were malicious. They were hopeful. Strange, yes, but hopeful. Because when science is absent and fear is abundant, people reach for anything. A jewel, a bird, a calendar full of constellations, even a dog with good ears. And who are we to laugh too hard? After all, modern cures have included electric helmets, lemon diets, and whatever that kale thing was. In the end, every age has its oddities. And for medieval folks, fighting sorrow was an art that involved smoke, fur, dust, and moonlight. So tonight, if you lie awake, restless and unsure, be grateful. No one is reaching for a pigeon or telling you to wear a dead owl like a hat. You get soft blankets, warm tea, maybe a quiet voice telling you this: you are not strange, you are not broken, you are simply human, and no owl is required. Welcome back. Still awake? Good. Because tonight we meet a new kind of sadness, the kind that doesn't scream or cry or panic. It just stares at the wall at noon and thinks, what's the point of anything? The monks had a name for it, acedia. Not anxiety, not depression, but something quieter, something slower. A creeping emptiness that arrived just after lunch, sat beside you during prayers, and refused to leave. Acedia was not seen as a mental health condition. No, it was a spiritual failure. A warning sign that your soul was getting lazy. And laziness, in medieval terms, was one slippery slope away from demonic influence. Monks feared acedia. They feared what it did to the heart. They feared what it said about their discipline, their faith, their effort. So if a monk started skipping verses, dozing during scripture, or gazing longingly at the sky while holding a half-finished psalm, they didn't suggest rest. They handed him more chores. Sad, are you? Sounds like you haven't chopped enough firewood. It was believed that sorrow was contagious, that one moody brother could spread acedia like mold in a damp hallway. So they tried to contain it, control it, crush it, with fasting and chanting and guilt. And if none of that worked, try mentally cataloging all your sins, alphabetically. It was somehow meant to help, and strangely, some monks did write beautiful, aching descriptions of this fog. They spoke of numbness, of restlessness, of lying in bed while the soul simply floated away. Their words, though framed in Latin and shame, sound suspiciously modern. But therapy? No. Instead, they were told, try being better, or at least feel worse about being bad. Even joy wasn't safe. Because, you see, in medieval Europe, laughter was suspicious. Not all laughter, of course. A chuckle at a festival? Fine. A smile at a goose slipping in mud? Understandable. But too much laughter, uncontrolled, unexpected? That was a red flag. Because laughter, they said, could lead to dancing. And dancing? To sin. And sin... Well, you know the drill. Theologians had opinions. Lots of them. Thomas Aquinas, for instance, a man who probably never giggled once, believed laughter should be moderate, purposeful. Laughter without reason? Demonic influence, obviously. Women, even worse. A laughing woman was clearly up to no good. Too joyful? She's a witch. Too quiet? She's hiding something. Men weren't immune either. If a man laughed at the wrong moment, during a sermon or while milking a goat, people got nervous. Why is he so merry? Does he know something we don't? Has he spoken to a spirit? Yes, a laugh in the wrong place was practically a spiritual earthquake. In some monasteries, novices were forbidden to laugh during meals, during prayer, during anything, really. Because the point wasn't joy. The point was order, and laughter, real laughter, was chaotic. Still, people laughed. Of course they did. You can't survive mud, leeches, and plague without at least a little humor. Villagers told jokes. Minstrels mocked kings. Even monks whispered puns in the garden when no one was looking. Because humans, no matter the century, need to laugh. They need the sudden brightness, the relief, the sound of something unclenching inside. But in those days, joy was tolerated, never fully trusted. So if you laughed too loudly, keep your voice down. And definitely don't do it near a bishop. Let's settle in, dear listener. Tonight we're leaving the monasteries and stepping quietly into the homes. Because in the medieval world, mental health wasn't just a problem of the soul. It was a problem of reputation. If your thoughts turned dark or your moods became inconvenient, it wasn't something to discuss. It was something to cover, to whisper about, or better yet, to pretend never happened. This wasn't cruelty, at least not always. It was fear, because a troubled mind in one family member was believed to reflect on everyone else. A daughter who wept too much? Maybe she was cursed. A son who spoke to shadows? Perhaps the whole bloodline was weak. So what did families do? They hid it. Some locked relatives in back rooms. Others arranged quiet pilgrimages. Not for healing, but for distance. The idea was, send them far away, to holy places, and hope they come back with less confusion and fewer questions. If that didn't work, there was always the monastery option. Let the church take care of them. They're already dealing with owls, herbs, and demons of noon. One more troubled soul won't upset the garden. But not all were so gentle. In harsher cases, families disowned their loved ones, especially if they were disruptive, or, heaven forbid, embarrassing. The worst sin in a medieval village was not madness. It was drawing attention. So if someone shouted at ghosts, or danced alone in the fields, they might be called mad. But if they did it in front of a visiting nobleman, then they were a disgrace. Some households handled it with silence. Total silence. No one mentioned the aunt who hadn't spoken in years. No one asked why the older brother was sent away just after the harvest. If you were clever, you knew not to ask. Children learned which questions should never leave their mouths, which stories were never repeated in the tavern, which names were only spoken behind closed shutters. If someone in your family had a darkness, you simply adjusted, quietly. You locked the doors more often. You prayed longer. You made sure visitors only came on sunny days when the world felt safe. You taught the rest of the children to smile extra wide, to be extra cheerful, to never ever cry in public. Because sorrow, like illness, was feared to be catching. A household with one broken thread might unravel entirely. And so the masks went on, the curtains stayed drawn, and the strange cousin was away studying. For years. Sometimes those sent away never came back. They disappeared into long journeys, into distant abbeys, into riverside hospitals no one visited. Or worse, they came back looking the same, but sounding like someone else. And the family, unsure what to do, simply welcomed them with polite meals and tighter smiles. There were no reunions with balloons, no declarations of healing, just, "You're back. We're glad. Don't talk too much." In towns and villages, a quiet code was followed. You cared for your own. But if your own became inconvenient, you made it look like nothing was wrong. No one wanted the attention, not from the priest, not from the steward, certainly not from the rumors. It wasn't just about shame. It was about survival. A family that looked unstable might lose marriage prospects, might be whispered about at market stalls, might find their names missing from invitation scrolls. So silence was safety, and even kindness had its limits. If someone began to cry for no reason, the goal wasn't comfort. It was distance. Give them something to do. Send them to pray. Hand them a broom. Point them toward the orchard. Let them cry among the apples, but not in front of guests. And certainly not during dinner. That wasn't the place for sorrow. That was the place for pretending everything was just fine. There are no maps for mornings like this. Just the hush of slow wind, the sigh of low-hung branches, and the earth warmed by yesterday. They walk now, 2 by 2, or alone, or in quiet clusters. Some carry baskets. Others hum, but only barely. It is not a market day. It is something older, something slower. They do not speak much, because the path asks for listening. Their feet follow stone laid long ago, worn flat by those who came with hopes, with doubts, with questions they couldn't name aloud. You may think they are pilgrims, and perhaps they are, but not the kind that seek miracles. These are pilgrims of memory, of patience, of quiet returns, and overhead the olive trees lean in. They have watched for centuries, not because they are wise, but because they stayed. Beneath one tree, a child kneels, tying a ribbon to a branch. The color is blue, soft, faded. It flutters just slightly, not a prayer, not a wish, just a presence, a gentle mark that says, I was here. That is enough. And the breeze, carrying nothing in particular, carries it anyway. Someone places a small bowl at the foot of a trunk. Inside, crumbs, a fig, a stone worn smooth. Offerings, perhaps, but not to gods, to memory, to silence, to whatever lives between the leaves and the sky. And as the sun moves ever so slightly, no one hurries. Because here, in the hush between thoughts, they remember what stillness feels like. And in remembering, they soften. Further down the path, there is a bend. Not sharp, just enough to hide what's next. And they do not rush to see it. Because here, the not knowing is part of the journey. A woman walks with her hand on her chest, as though steadying a thought. A man follows behind, carrying a piece of folded cloth. No one tells them what to do. There are no signs, no guards, no chants, only rhythm. Step, breeze, pause. They come upon a stone wall, low, half buried in wild grass. It holds no message, but still they stop. It is not what it says, but what it remembers. One by one they sit, not together, but not alone. Some close their eyes. Others trace the edges of the old stones with fingers that have done this before. There is no sermon, no lesson, only the sun warming backs, the wind moving through open hands. Someone begins to hum, softly. Not a song meant to be shared, just a sound to keep company with silence. And still the olive branches sway, their motion a kind of agreement. Yes, this is how it has always been, and how it will be again. Because rituals do not need altars, they need return. They need someone to show up not with answers, but with presence. And today they have. Each step, each pause, each small act a thread in the quiet fabric of remembrance. And you, if you were watching, might not know what was happening, but you would feel it. A slowing, a softening, a deep exhale of something older than grief and gentler than joy. A man rises, brushes dust from his knees, leaves behind a tiny shell. No one speaks, but everyone sees. The path continues, and so do they. Further down, a boy lingers behind, not lost, just curious. He kneels by a stone, one hand in the dirt. He finds a feather, half buried, pale. He does not keep it. He places it at the base of a tree, presses it into the soil with 2 fingers, then nods once. No one told him to do this, but the moment felt like it asked, and so he answered. Others pass by, offering nothing but their shadows. And yet that too feels like a gift, because there are places that do not need things. They need time. They need people who will stand still long enough to remember they are part of the silence too. A dog barks far off. The sound drifts in, then fades. The moment holds. At the edge of the grove, an old woman waits. Her eyes closed, her lips moving with words only she can hear. Not prayers, but names, one after another as if calling them back for just a breath. And maybe they do return, not as spirits, not as visions, but as calm, as quiet, as the breeze that brushes her cheek. She smiles, not because she sees, but because she feels. And now it is time. They rise, they gather, they walk. The grove does not close, but it does quiet, and beneath the olive branches, where nothing was asked and everything was felt, they leave not with knowledge, but with knowing. That is enough. That is always enough. And as they walk away, no one looks back. Not out of forgetting, but out of trust. They know the place remains, not in stone, but in rhythm, in return. The path narrows, the grass grows taller, but the silence walks with them still. One person hums again. Not the same tune, but the same hush. It drifts, it fades, it lingers, like the olive trees, still standing, still listening, even long after the last footstep is gone. And in some future dusk, someone else will walk this path. Uncertain, quiet, barefoot perhaps. They'll feel it, beneath the dust, within the breeze, that something waits here, not to be discovered, but to be joined. That's the gift the grove offers, not insight, but inclusion. You were not required to speak, only to notice, and now you carry it in the curve of your hand, in the hush between your thoughts, a stillness no one can take, because it was never given. It was shared, and now it is yours, and in the quietest part of you it stays, a room without walls, a memory without sound, a breath. It is enough. Let's slow down for a moment, dear listener, because tonight we talk not of battles or broom closets, but of something far more dangerous. Paper and ink. Before texts, before emails, before whispered gossip at the tavern, there were letters. And in the medieval world, nothing was quite as powerful or as ruinous as a well-placed piece of parchment. The nobility, for all their powdered wigs and polished boots, were obsessed with writing. They wrote to confess, to accuse, to flirt, to scheme. They wrote love and betrayal, and minor complaints about the soup. Some wrote poems to ladies they'd never met. Others wrote threats disguised as invitations. And many wrote things they never should have while drunk. Every letter was a weapon. It could spark a duel, start a war, end a marriage, or accidentally marry you to a cousin in another province. Ink once spilled was permanent, and unlike today, there was no unsend button, no second draft, just wax and fate. A careless flourish of the pen could travel miles, land in the wrong hands, be read aloud in court, or worse, at dinner. Some nobles were careful. They wrote in code, in metaphor, in overly flowery phrases that meant nothing and everything. A sentence like, "The moon bends low this season," might mean, "Meet me by the orchard after the third bell. Bring wine. No husband." The most dramatic letters weren't just written. They were kissed, perfumed, and sealed with rings passed down through generations. Imagine being handed a velvet ribbon tied around a scroll that simply read, "I know what you did." That was enough to keep a duke awake for days. So letters were feared, and treasured, and locked in drawers only opened at night. Of course, not all correspondence was scandal. Some was heartbreak. Some was longing. Some was just one soul reaching for another across parchment and miles. There were letters from sons to mothers, from wives to husbands at war, from exiled daughters to silent homes that never wrote back. There was beauty in those pages, but even beauty was dangerous. A romantic letter, misinterpreted, could be read as treason. A poem could be twisted into a political insult. One misplaced metaphor and suddenly you were harboring ill intent toward the crown. Oops! Scribes, those who copied and carried letters, held quiet power. They knew secrets. They read between lines. Sometimes they edited, just a little. Sometimes they passed copies to the wrong people, or the right ones, and suddenly a private thought became a public scandal. So nobles became paranoid. They hid letters in floorboards. They burned them after reading. They whispered instead. But the whisper rarely traveled as far as ink. So they kept writing, even when it ruined them, because letters were the only place they could tell the truth. A nobleman might host feasts, command soldiers, ride horses in shiny armor, and still cry while writing, "Please forgive me." A lady might be locked in a tower, her fate stitched in marriage contracts, and still write, night after night, "I still remember the orchard." Those pages, those crumpled, candle-stained pages, held more honesty than most confessions, and more danger than most swords, because the sword cut the body. The letter? It cut the reputation, which in noble circles was far more fatal. Welcome back, dear listener. Let's shift our gaze from the ink-stained secrets of letters to something even more fragile. The noble family name. Yes, titles are grand, manners are polished, but behind all that silverware was one undeniable truth. It was surprisingly easy to lose everything. Let's start in Europe, where a single scandal could turn a household from dinner guests to whispered disgrace. Nobles were remembered not for kindness, but for caution. For not misstepping in front of the wrong bishop, the wrong baron, the wrong dinner guest who happened to be writing a letter home. Make no mistake, your reputation was a house of cards dressed in velvet. Meanwhile, younger sons, those without land or title, were quietly nudged into the church or the army. No questions asked, no dreams permitted. They were the extras in the grand play of nobility. They nodded, smiled, and accepted vows or blades, whichever came first. Now let's visit Russia, a place where noble families wore their status like a crown and a curse. A single mistake, a misplaced word, a wrong political sigh could strip you of land, name, serfs, and honor. Everything gone, in a whisper, in a signature. Centuries of effort erased with one poorly timed disagreement. The name you inherited could vanish before your next feast. Then there was Japan, where nobility was an intricate dance of bloodlines, lineage, and unspoken expectations. A single dishonor, real or rumored, could require more than apology. It might demand a letter, a sword, and a final bow. Harsh? Yes. But they believed the name was worth more than the body that bore it. Across all these lands, one thread remained. Nobility was a performance, and not everyone could keep up the act. A bad harvest? Embarrassing. A daughter refusing a suitor? Disastrous. A cousin caught drinking in the street? Tragic. But also very likely. Families clung to decorum like shipwrecked sailors. They smiled at banquets, even when the ceiling leaked. They bowed deeply, even when their shoes had been mended twice. To be noble was to pretend, but pretending has a cost. It makes you vulnerable. One wrong step and the gossip grows. One lost duel and the honor's gone. There was no insurance for dignity, no safety net for status. Even alliances weren't safe. Marriage could save a family, or doom it. If you married the wrong person, one with debts, enemies, or questionable relatives, well, say goodbye to the good silver. Sometimes families disappeared quietly, a name no longer invited, a crest removed from city gates. Other times they fell spectacularly, publicly, loudly. With court trials, accusations, and the occasional arrest, the audience loved a downfall, especially when it came in embroidered silk. You see, the higher you rose, the more entertaining your fall became. So nobles lived cautiously, not bravely, not boldly, but carefully, smiling when told, bowing on cue, and always watching who sat beside them, because allies turned into enemies with alarming speed, especially after dessert. So yes, titles sounded glamorous, estates looked grand, but beneath the gowns was fear. Fear of ruin, fear of exile, fear of being forgotten. Because that was the true death for nobility. Not a sword, not poison, but being erased. Let's begin tonight with a man in a hat. Not a wizard, not a knight, but an archaeologist, which in some ways is all three at once. It was the spring of 1900, and Sir Arthur Evans stood beneath the sun, staring at scattered stones and half-buried walls. He wasn't just visiting, he was chasing a ghost. The ghost of a civilization so old, it had slipped through the cracks of history and into the arms of legend. You've heard whispers of it, perhaps in myths of labyrinths and minotaurs, of strange kings and seas that swallowed cities. But for Evans, it wasn't enough to wonder. He wanted proof. He wanted the dust, the doorways, the truth. And so he came to Crete, not with armies, not with fanfare, just notebooks, tools, and an idea that maybe, just maybe, There was something beneath his feet that had been waiting for thousands of years. He began digging, slowly, patiently, carefully. And what he found was more than stone. He found color, red columns, frescoes of leaping bulls, rooms that opened into other rooms, and stairways that led into silence. He had discovered Knossos, not just a palace, but a world, one that had danced, feasted, written, and vanished. Evans gave it a name, the Minoans, after King Minos, of course, the mythical ruler with a monster in his basement. But here's the strange part. There were no weapons, no fortresses, no brutal gods carved in stone. Instead, he found art. He found women in flounced skirts, laughter in clay figurines, and peace etched into the very layout of the city. It wasn't what people expected, and that was the beauty of it. For decades, historians had told us that power came from swords, that civilization meant conquest, that empires must roar. But the Minoans whispered. They built with curves, not corners, with openness, not walls, with music, not chains. Evans fell in love, some say a little too much. Because as he restored the site, he didn't just brush away dirt. He added things. Repainted walls, rebuilt columns the way he imagined they once stood. He wanted to bring it back not just accurately, but beautifully. And in doing so, he blurred the line between what was found and what was hoped for. Was it still archaeology? Or was it now a dream in stone? That's the tricky part about digging up the past. You don't just find bones and bricks. You find your own reflection. Evans saw peace and grace and elegance. So that's what he revealed. Others saw flaws, guesses, wishful thinking. But even critics couldn't deny the magic. Because Knossos wasn't just a site. It was a story of what once was, of what might have been, of what still waits deep underground for someone to ask the right question. So tonight, as you rest, imagine the palace as it once stood, painted in sunset reds, echoing with the sound of sandals on stone and laughter from a courtyard filled with dancers and dreams. There are ghosts in the ground, dear listener, not the frightening kind, but the kind that remind us we are not the first to hope, to build, to fall in love with the world we live in. Sir Arthur Evans chased a ghost and found a civilization wrapped in silence and sea salt dust. He didn't find every answer, but he left us something to wonder about. And sometimes that's even better. All right, dear listener, tonight we're not chasing kings or deciphering lost languages or falling into underground palaces. No, tonight we're just going to look at a wall. Yes, a wall, but not just any wall. A wall that remembers. Picture it. Knossos, the Minoan palace. Crete, about 3,500 years ago. There's music in the air. Someone's juggling fruit in the courtyard, and the walls. They're telling stories, not with words, but with paint. Colors, curves, and women. So many women. Some are dancing. Some are blessing something, no one's quite sure what. Others are just there, in the center, looking out at you like you've just arrived late to a very old celebration. They're not background figures. They're not decoration. They're the whole scene, which, for ancient art, is kind of a big deal. You see, in a lot of ancient cultures, men got the spotlight. Women were usually, well, holding fruit trays, but not here. Here, the women raise their arms. They wear intricate skirts. Their hair is wild and proud. And their expressions? Confident, like they know something you definitely don't. And maybe they do. Scholars call them priestesses, or maybe goddesses, or dancers in ritual. No one agrees, which means they're probably all of the above. There's one in particular, Snake Lady. Yes, that's what people call her. She's holding 2 snakes, staring straight ahead, with a cat on her head. Yes, really. You wouldn't argue with her. You'd say, "Yes, ma'am," and maybe offer to sweep the floor. But what were these women doing? That's where it gets fuzzy. Maybe they were performing ceremonies. Maybe they were just being fabulous. Or maybe, and this is a wild theory, they were simply important. Imagine that. No swords, no crowns, just presence. The Minoans seemed to think there was power in beauty, in rhythm, in standing tall and looking directly at whoever walked past. Even the palace architecture agrees. The rooms spiral, open, curved, not rigid or square. It all feels designed for motion, for gatherings, for ritual, or for people who valued grace as much as they did grain. Now here's where things get spicy. Some scholars think we're romanticizing, that we're reading too much into a few wall paintings. And maybe they're right. Maybe these women were just figures in a story, characters in a mural. But here's the thing. No one painted warriors. No one carved kings. No one made statues of conquerors with spears. They painted dolphins, flowers, and women dancing in joy and ceremony. That says something, even if we don't know exactly what it is. So what happened? Where did this world go? Earthquakes, maybe. Or volcanoes, or invaders, or just time. Whatever it was, it left these walls behind. Still standing, still watching, still quietly holding on to whatever story they were trying to tell. And that's where you come in. You listening in the dark, with your soft blanket and sleepy eyes. You're part of this now, because stories don't need to be solved. They need to be remembered, carried. So the next time you think about ancient history, don't just picture swords and scrolls and statues of men on horses. Picture a room bathed in sunset, a woman with her arms raised, music in the distance, the soft smell of olive oil and incense, and a wall that still remembers what joy used to look like. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the room is not the king. It's the one who paints the walls after he's gone. And here's something else. Have you noticed how the Minoans painted movement? Their women don't stand still. They lean. They step. Their arms reach, their eyes engage, their skirts seem to sway, even though they're made of stone and color. That tells us something. That whoever painted them understood energy. Not just how a body stands, but how it feels to stand. That's not decoration. That's memory. And these women, these painted ones, they were probably seen every day by every person passing through the palace halls. Maybe a cook carrying olives would glance up and see that snake goddess and straighten his back. Or maybe a child running through a corridor would mimic the arm pose just for fun. These images weren't locked away. They were public, familiar, trusted. And so now, thousands of years later, you and I get to meet them too. Not in a temple, but in this quiet moment together. We don't know their names, but we know their confidence, we know their presence, and we know that someone thought they were worth painting again and again. Even on columns, even in corners. Which says a lot about what that culture valued. Not just gold, not just grain, but grace. They left behind no epic poem, no war diary, no emperor's list of victories. They left dancers, figures with snakes and flowers, painted women who stare right back at us like they're wondering what we're still doing with so many armies and so few flowers. Maybe they're laughing a little, or maybe they're waiting for us to finally catch up. So tonight, as you let your eyes grow heavy, imagine you're walking those same corridors. The breeze is warm. The columns are red. And in the fresco ahead, a woman raises her hand not to warn, not to wave, but simply to welcome you. That's what the walls remember. And now so do you. And one last thing, before we let the dream take over. These women, the ones on the walls, they didn't fade. Even after earthquakes, invasions, centuries of silence, they remained. Their colors dulled, their lines cracked, but their presence still here. So if anyone tells you that soft things don't last, that quiet beauty disappears, tell them about the women on the palace walls. Tell them they're still watching. And if you listen closely, in the silence between stories, you might just hear one of them smile. Let's begin tonight with a puzzle. A very old puzzle. And no, not the kind you solve with edge pieces and a cup of tea. This puzzle was built from stone. Big, confusing, twisting stone. Some said it was a palace, others a prison. But most people? They called it a labyrinth. You've probably heard of it. The labyrinth of Knossos, home of the Minotaur, beast body, bull head, roaming through endless halls. You get lost, your dinner. Simple as that. Or maybe not. Because here's what's strange. When archaeologists started digging, they didn't find monster bones. No cages, no signs of panic, no paintings of a bull-headed brute chomping on unlucky tourists. What they found was something different. A palace. Yes, but not a fortress. No moats, no gates, no battlements. What they found was complexity. Rooms upon rooms, hallways that turned without warning, stairs that went down, then down again. It wasn't a trap, it was a system. Maybe a palace, maybe a temple, maybe both, but most definitely not a dungeon. So where did the myth come from? That's the next part of tonight's story. You see, ancient visitors from the Greek mainland might have come to Crete. And when they stepped into Knossos, with its red columns, its painted walls, its hidden corridors, they must have thought, this place is alive. It didn't follow rules. It wasn't square. It curved. It breathed. And maybe, like all things we don't understand, they made a story to fit the feeling. A monster in the maze, a hero with a sword, a girl with thread, because thread is comforting. It helps you get back out, even from your own imagination. But here's a twist. There was a bull. Well, not one bull, many. The Minoans loved them. They painted them. They built arenas. They even leapt over them. Yes, leapt. Acrobats would run, grab the horns, and flip. It wasn't sport, it was ritual. It was grace, and risk, and meaning woven into movement. So maybe that's where the Minotaur began. Not as a creature, but as a memory. Of bull and blood, motion and myth. A symbol, not a monster. But what about the maze? Well, Knossos is big, really big. To walk through it, even today, is to lose your sense of direction. 1 minute, you're in a courtyard. The next, a storage hall with giant clay jars and no way out. There's light from above, but the walls close in. And you start to feel like you're not supposed to know where you're going. But it's not frightening. It's curious. Designed that way, maybe. To guide people inward, not just physically, but spiritually. A kind of journey. A walk through memory. Ritual. Mystery. So maybe the labyrinth wasn't a trap. It was a path. Something sacred. Something meant to be walked slowly. No beast, just belief. And here's something fun. The word labyrinth might come from the word labris, an old term for the double axe. And guess what shows up all over Knossos? Double axes, carved into walls, etched into stone, held in painted hands. So maybe the labyrinth was the place of the labris, not of danger, but of ritual. A place where life and death and ceremony all danced together. But myths are sticky. And the Greeks liked drama. So the Minotaur stayed, and the girl with the thread, and the hero who ran off with someone else's glory. And meanwhile, the real palace sat quietly, its walls fading, its secrets waiting. Until one day, centuries later, a man in a hat dug it back up, and now we're here. Together. Looking at the ruins with fresh eyes. So tonight, let the labyrinth twist again, not in fear, but in wonder. No beast is chasing you, no sword is needed, just curiosity, and maybe a bit of thread for the journey back. Because sometimes the scariest mazes are the ones we build ourselves, and the kindest ones, the ones filled with bulls and color and candlelight, are the ones we're finally learning how to walk through, even in our dreams. Picture it now. You're walking the halls of a place once thought impossible. The walls are quiet, but not silent. There's a hum, a warmth, like the stones themselves are remembering something. Each turn you take feels deliberate. Each step echoes with someone else's footfall from 3,000 years ago. You aren't alone, and you aren't lost. You're just wandering the way they did, not for escape, but for meaning. A labyrinth, after all, isn't just stone. It's a question built from walls. What do you seek? Where do you begin? And when you find the center, what do you do with what's waiting there? In Knossos, there may not have been a Minotaur, but there was mystery. And mystery, when treated with reverence, can be even more powerful than monsters. Maybe that's the truth hidden in the myth. Not that someone was trapped, but that someone was changed. Because real labyrinths aren't meant to trap you. They're meant to transform you. So when you dream tonight, and you find yourself somewhere winding and unfamiliar, don't panic. You might just be inside a very old story. One you've always known. One with no beast and no end. Just a path and a memory, and the quiet turning of your own gentle footsteps. And if you listen closely, someone might be walking just ahead of you. And when you wake, you might not remember the path. Not exactly, but you'll carry something. A quiet knowing, a softened edge, a small thread tucked behind the ear. Because every dreamer who steps into the labyrinth leaves with something new, even if they don't know what they were looking for. And that is more than enough. So rest now, and let the walls reshape. There's always time to return to the center when the dream begins again. Sleep well. Tonight, let's walk through a room. Not your room, not mine, but a room from long ago. And not just any room. A room from the palace at Knossos, Crete, where the walls are faded, but still whisper. This one's not the throne room, not the kitchen, not a temple, not even a hallway. It's smaller, quieter, tucked away. Maybe it was for dreaming, or healing, or waiting for something to begin. There are steps leading down into a low, sunken space, like someone wanted to walk beneath the world for a moment. There's a basin, not quite a bathtub, not quite a sink, more like a question, carved from stone. What was it for? Some think it held water, for washing, for ceremony, maybe for rebirth. Others think it was symbolic, a place to feel submerged without being soaked, like walking into a story and standing still. This space, it's called the lustral basin. Lovely name, right? It sounds like something you'd find in a dream where the doors don't quite close and the light is always golden. What happened in this room? No one knows, but there are clues, paintings, frescoes, symbols on the walls. Some show spirals, others show double axes, and one, a lady in flowing dress holding something we can't name. She's not scared, she's not sad, she's present, which makes you wonder, was this room for fear or for comfort? It's easy to imagine a person stepping in, not to hide, but to prepare, to breathe, to listen, to be ready. In a world of chaos, this room feels like a pause button, a sacred one. Some people call it a shrine, a place for ritual, a space for transition, like the breath before a song begins, or the silence before a truth is spoken. There were no windows, but there was light, reflected maybe, filtered through stone. It would have felt cool, quiet, safe, not because of locks, but because of meaning. Spaces like this weren't meant to impress. They were meant to hold, and maybe you've known a place like that. Not fancy, but necessary. A stairwell you paused on, a closet you cried in, a bench in a park where something shifted and you can't say why. That's this room. We often ask history for grand answers, dates, battles, kingdoms. But sometimes it answers back with a soft stone basin and silence. And that's enough, because what you feel when you step in, even thousands of years later, is a hush. Not fear, not confusion. Just hush, like the walls are listening, like your thoughts are finally sitting down. That's rare and sacred. Not every story needs heroes. Some just need rooms that remind us to slow down. This was one of them, and the people who built it, they knew something. Not about conquest, but about stillness. So tonight, when you close your eyes, don't picture a throne. Picture a step leading down into a room that wasn't for sleeping, but helped everyone sleep better. Maybe that's what healing is. Not fixing, just resting where meaning once lived, even if no one can explain the floor plan. And maybe, just maybe, this space was meant for more than one purpose. A bath? A chamber of prayer? A waiting place for a priestess or a young initiate? We'll never know. But we can guess. And sometimes, guessing with wonder is better than knowing with certainty. Imagine a woman stepping down into that room. Barefoot, calm. She's holding a small bowl, or a flower, or nothing at all. She breathes. She kneels. She listens. Not to gods shouting from the sky, but to something smaller, gentler, inside. And that's what the room was for. Because sometimes buildings speak in whispers. And those whispers are the most important ones to hear. We spend so much time chasing big stories, wars, treasures, great escapes. But this was a quiet choice someone made to shape a space for stillness. A space without audience, without applause. A room just for being. So what can we learn from a stone basin in a hidden room? Maybe this. Not every day needs to be loud. Not every act needs to be explained. Some things are sacred because they exist. Because someone once believed a person might need a space to just be. So here's a thought. What if we built more rooms like that today? Not for ceremony, not for selfies, but for silence, for pauses, for questions that don't need answers. That's what this little room teaches us, even now. And tonight, you've walked into it. With your thoughts, your memories, your soft breath meeting the ancient air. You've stepped down into a place where nothing had to happen to mean something. And in that, there's peace. So when you drift off, maybe you'll dream of that basin. That hush. That stone silence holding stories too quiet to name. And maybe in the morning you'll carry that stillness with you. Just enough to face the noise of the day ahead, with grace. Because the quietest rooms sometimes leave the loudest echoes. And if someday someone asks you, what was it for? You can smile and say, it was for pausing, for feeling, for remembering that quiet is not the absence of meaning, it is the meaning. Because the lustral basin, like all the best places, didn't shout. It welcomed. It waited. And it let people bring their own purpose into its stillness. And maybe that's what you've done tonight too. So close your eyes now. The walls are cool, the air is calm, and the room is waiting. Sleep well, and let the silence take gentle shape. And in your dreams tonight, if you pass through ancient stone and find a quiet stairway downward, you'll know where you are. It's not the past. It's not a myth. It's the stillness you've always needed. Rest begins right here. Let's begin, as we often do, with something quiet. A hallway. Old. Stone. Cool to the touch and older than memory. At the end of this hallway, a room. Not a grand one. No golden throne. No towering statue. Just space. Worn and still. Simple, but not empty. This is what we find again and again at Knossos. Rooms. And more rooms. Some labeled. Some guessed at. And many with no name at all. Archaeologists try, of course. They call them storage rooms, servants' quarters, closets, or workshops. But truthfully, no one knows. Because these rooms, the ones with no titles, hold something deeper. They hold silence. Ambiguity. The weight of daily life without ceremony. And that makes them important. You see, not every room was for kings or rituals. Some were just for being. Maybe one stored oil. Maybe another was a place to sit and wait for the rain to pass. Maybe someone sang in one of them, or wept, or laughed, or leaned against the wall with a full heart and no one to tell. We will never know. And that's okay, because these nameless rooms are strangely familiar. They remind us of the corners in our own lives, those in-between spaces that carry more than we give them credit for. A hallway, a porch, a dusty corner of a kitchen where your grandmother once stood without needing a reason. These rooms at Knossos? They were lived in, worn down by bare feet and quiet moments. And that, dear listener, is history. Not the loud kind, but the kind that lingers. Now imagine. You're walking through the palace. Sunlight flickers through an upper window. Your hand grazes the wall. And there it is. A doorway. You step in. No signs, no markings, just space. It smells faintly of clay, dust, and maybe, just maybe, of time itself. You don't speak because silence fits here. You sit. You think of nothing. Or maybe you think of everything. And in that moment you feel it. This room knows things, not in words, but in feeling. That's the magic of these nameless rooms. They don't need labels to be meaningful. They don't need stories to be remembered. They simply exist. And their quiet presence asks something gentle of us. To stop, to breathe, to appreciate space for space's sake. How rare that is. In a world that moves fast and talks loud, a room that does neither is a treasure, and Knossos has many. So tonight, as you drift to sleep, don't dream of kings or monsters. Dream of doorways that lead to nothing but peace, and rooms with no names, but every reason to be remembered. And here's something soft to think about. What if these rooms were the most human part of the palace? Not the showy parts, not the painted ones, but the ones where someone once took off their sandals and exhaled. No one painted that, no one recorded it, but it mattered. Because history isn't just what was built. It's how a space held the people who needed it. Maybe a mother once sat there, braiding her daughter's hair before a festival. Maybe an old man watched shadows crawl across the floor and thought of a time when he could dance. Maybe no one did anything but sit and enjoy the cool. That's enough. That's history. Some rooms weren't for ceremony. They were for presence, for pause. And somehow, after all these years, they still hold that feeling. Even empty, even ruined. They haven't forgotten what it's like to be occupied by quiet people doing quiet things. So let's remember that when we imagine palaces, not just marble and myths, but chipped floors and warmth. Maybe the greatest treasure of Knossos isn't the art or the architecture. Maybe it's the spaces that don't demand attention, but offer it. A room with no name is a room where your thoughts can stretch out. It welcomes everyone. And it keeps nothing except the feeling of being used gently. That's worth something. So tonight, let your mind wander into those spaces. No guide, no rules, just air, stone, and you. A listener in a long line of listeners. Let's sit a while longer in this room. There are no distractions, no lists, no clocks. Just space. The kind of space that makes your shoulders settle down a little lower. You might not know what this room was for. But maybe it was for this, for remembering how to be quiet without being lonely. The walls aren't decorated. The floor is uneven. But the light is kind. And maybe, before the world forgot, someone lit a lamp here, just to see their own hands in the dark. We make such rooms corners of our homes that feel better than the rest. Benches in gardens, the last step before the door. We don't name them, we don't talk about them, but they're real. And necessary. So don't worry that the archaeologists couldn't label this room. Its purpose might not have been for display. It might have been for exhale. And if that's all, it's enough. Tonight, when sleep begins to reach for you, let it find you in a quiet place. A stone room with no name, no title, just stillness. Let it fill you. Let it tell you, in its ancient, wordless way, you belong here. You are welcome. You are safe. And the room will wait as long as you need. Now close your eyes and rest in the echo of things no one ever had to say. And if you ever find yourself in a moment that feels small, a pause no one notices, a silence that holds no sound, remember this room, not because it was famous, but because it was full of something we all need, quiet and care. Without explanation. Sleep now. The room is still here, waiting. Peace is here now. Stillness stays with. There is a hallway beneath the palace. It doesn't shout, it doesn't sparkle, but it waits, and it remembers. The air is cooler here, the light dimmer, like dusk that never fades. Some call it a corridor, others a passage. But maybe it's neither. Maybe it's a breath, stretched long beneath the stone. The walls are close. You could touch both sides if you reached. And maybe someone once did. Walk with me. Let's go slowly. Each step echoes but softly. The floor is uneven, not broken, just worn by time and footfalls you'll never meet. There's no decoration here, no paintings, no grand designs, just stone, and silence, and memory. And still it speaks. It tells you you're not the first. That long ago, others walked this way too. Not in fear, but in purpose. Maybe even peace. Maybe they came carrying water, or bread, or a story they weren't ready to share until the dark felt kind enough to hold it. Corridors like this aren't for show. They're for transition. From one place to another. From one version of yourself to the next. You begin at one end, uncertain, thinking you know who you are. And when you reach the other, something has shifted. Not everything, but something. That's the gift of passageways. They let you change in secret, like a whisper curved into stone. We don't talk enough about the spaces between destinations. We rush, we race. But here, you slow, you listen, you remember. And the hallway holds you, not because it has arms, but because it has stillness. Stillness that doesn't ask questions. Stillness that doesn't judge the pace of your walk. It just waits, and welcomes, and watches. And you become softer, step by step, breath by breath. So many have walked here. Children chasing each other with clay cups, priestesses in quiet pairs, someone once carrying their final thought before it became a farewell. These walls remember what no scroll recorded, and that, dear listener, is why we return to them, not for facts, but for feeling. This passageway, it may not lead to a throne, but it leads to somewhere deeper. And maybe, just maybe, that's where you were meant to go all along. So let's keep walking. Ahead, the corridor bends. Not sharply, but gently, like a path that knows how to turn without startling the traveler. There are no windows, no doors, only the slow rhythm of stone. You wonder, was this meant to be hidden? Or was it always meant to be found only by those willing to walk slowly? There is comfort in such places, not because they are bright, but because they are honest. The stones don't pretend, they don't perform. They simply hold their shape and their silence. And you, just by being here, become part of that silence. That's rare. Maybe someone once lit a torch here. The flames casting soft light on walls that don't need to speak to be understood. Maybe someone waited in this corridor, not for rescue, but for readiness. Maybe this hallway was never meant to lead out. Maybe it was made to lead in, inward, toward the self, toward stillness, toward truth too shy for daylight. It's funny, isn't it, that some of the most important moments happen in corridors. A quiet nod, a whispered promise, a breath before speaking aloud. Not everything needs a stage. This hallway knows that, and now so do you. When we picture ancient places, we imagine the open, the grand, the impressive. But Knossos reminds us, some of the richest spaces are narrow, unadorned, and deeply felt. They carry us not because they're beautiful, but because they're steady, like a hand you forgot was holding yours. And here, deep under the weight of centuries, you are not lost. You are exactly where you're meant to be. So pause. Take one more breath. Let the quiet settle in. You are still walking, but softer now. And when you reach the next doorway, you'll know the passage changed you. Gently, quietly, completely. And here's something else. Not all endings feel like endings. Sometimes you step out of a corridor and into light that feels unfamiliar. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You notice the sound of wind where you hadn't before. You feel your feet touch the ground a little more honestly. The hallway behind you doesn't close. It simply fades into memory. But it stays. Not in stone, but in you. That's the quiet power of in-between places. They don't tell you what to believe. They invite you to notice what's already there. And maybe, tonight, as you drift into sleep, you'll find yourself back there, walking slowly, breathing deeply, carried by a silence that doesn't ask but offers. Let that corridor wrap around you, cool and still as dusk. Let its memory be this ground beneath your dreams. You've walked far enough now. The light is near, but for one more moment, stay. Let the passage hold you just a little longer. You don't need a destination. You need only this quiet, this moment, this peace. Now close your eyes. The corridor remains behind your thoughts. It is not gone, it is resting. And so are you. And if you wake before the sun, you might remember that passageway. Not clearly, not with detail, but with feeling. A softness in the chest, a breath that lingers, the hush of stone beneath your steps. You'll rise not louder, but deeper, because something moved inside you, even if only a little. And you'll carry that through your day. A quieter rhythm, a slower pace, a kindness you forgot to offer yourself. That's what the corridor gave you. Not answers, but calm. And tonight when the sky darkens again, it'll be there, waiting. And you'll return as gently as you left. Soft steps remain beneath thought. Quiet follows and nothing else is needed. You're home. Here we are, the end of the corridor, the last step in the palace of breath and shadow. It's not a grand finale. There are no trumpets, no fire, no carved farewell. Just one more room. Simple. Stone. Still. But something about it feels different, not louder, just deeper. The kind of space that holds your gaze a moment longer than you expect. This room doesn't ask for explanation. It simply waits. You walk in slowly, not out of fear, but out of care, as if entering the heart of something long asleep. There is no throne, no altar, no fire pit, just walls that have watched the turning of centuries, and a floor that knows the exact weight of silence. Maybe this was a room for endings, or beginnings, or both. You imagine someone long ago kneeling here, not because they were told to, but because the air invited them. There's a softness to this space, a hush beneath the hush. Maybe that's why it was built, not to impress, but to hold. Hold breath, hold grief, hold memory. We build such rooms still, not always with stone, but with time, with moments that arrive unannounced and leave us quiet and awake. This is that kind of room, the last one, the one you find when you're not looking, a room that offers nothing but its presence, and somehow that is everything. Here, you stop thinking about what came before. You stop wondering what comes next. You just stand and breathe. And in that breath, you realize you've made it, not to a destination, but to a knowing. That stillness is not the absence of motion. It is the motion you were meant to find. So stay here a little longer. There's no rush. The world outside can wait. In this room, you might sit, or kneel, or lie down on the cool stone and listen to the hum of quiet that lives here. You might hear nothing at all, and still you'll feel heard. Some say the palace at Knossos was full of mystery, full of secrets. But maybe, just maybe, this was its clearest truth, that silence is not empty. It is full of waiting. Someone once lit a lamp here. You can almost see it, a flicker against stone. Not for light, but for warmth. Because even the quietest rooms need a heartbeat, and even the stillest places once held motion. So now you bring yours, your breath, your thoughts, your presence, and the room accepts you. Not because you're royal, not because you're right, but because you're here. That's all it ever asked. That someone would enter with gentleness, that someone would stand without asking for anything more than the peace already offered. This is not a room for answers. It is a room for release. You can leave questions here. Lay them down like a bundle of cloth and walk out lighter. Because the palace, for all its beauty, was not a place only of power. It was a place for pause, a place where stone held stories, where doorways led not to glory, but to grace. And now you've seen it, not with your eyes alone, but with your stillness, with your willingness to enter without needing to name. Stay a moment more. Feel the quiet settle in like dust in the corner. You don't need to speak. The room already understands. And when you do leave, because you must, leave slowly. Let your steps echo softly. Let your breath stay steady. Let the stillness walk with you. There's no need to remember every detail. What matters will remain. The light on the wall, the shape of the silence, the feeling of being completely and quietly welcomed. You'll carry that through tomorrow, through your dreams. It may not shout, but it will stay. Because rooms like this, they're never truly left. They linger in the pauses between one thought and the next. They hum in the background of quiet mornings and slow afternoons. You'll notice it when you least expect, a stillness that feels like coming home. And if you return someday, even just in your thoughts, you'll find it unchanged. Because rooms like this don't chase time. They hold it. They make space for softness in a world that forgets how much we need it. So now, as the night folds in, close your eyes. You've walked the palace. You've felt the stone. You've heard what silence has to say. And now you rest in the last room, in the quietest room, in the room that never asked for anything but your presence. Sleep gently, dear listener. The story waits here. So whenever you need it, you know where to return, not for answers, but for stillness. And stillness, as you now know, is enough. And in the quiet that follows, you may find something unexpected. A memory, maybe, or a feeling you forgot had a name. Perhaps it's calm. Perhaps it's longing. Perhaps it's just the soft understanding that you are not alone in needing quiet. Others have stood here. Others have breathed just as you do now. And though the room is still, though time has shifted and walls have faded, its welcome has not dimmed. You were not asked to be wise, only present. You were not asked to know, only to notice. And that you've done beautifully. So now let the final stone close behind you without sound. Let the stillness wrap gently around your shoulders. You don't have to hold it all. Just this moment, just this peace. You've reached the end of the journey, but not the end of what you carry. So go now, softly. And if the world outside ever grows too loud, you know where to return. To the last room. The quietest room, the truest one. Your own. Sleep now, and let the silence stay beside you. It remembers. It holds. It never fades away. Always here.